On a wind-swept bluff overlooking the Atlantic, where the salt spray paints the granite gray, there stands a palace, or what is left of one. The year is 1957. Vandals have been here. Windows, once vast sheets of polished glass that framed the ocean like a living masterpiece, are now jagged teeth in a skeletal grin. Inside, the silence is heavy, broken only by the cry of gulls and the relentless whisper of the wind through broken panes. Dust, thick as velvet, covers everything. It coats the peeling gold leaf on the ceiling of the great hall. It fills the deep carvings of the mahogany ballroom floor where presidents and princesses once danced. A local reporter, a young man with a flash camera and a sense of history, walks through the cavernous rooms. He is documenting the end of an era. In 2 weeks, the demolition crews are scheduled to arrive. The headline has already been written, "Finch's Folly Comes Down." He steps into the grand library. Bookshelves 20 feet high are stripped bare. A single leather-bound volume lies on the floor, its spine broken. He stoops to pick it up. It is a ledger. The first page reads, in elegant fading script, Briarcliff Estate, Household Accounts, 1912. He turns a page. January, coal for 65 fireplaces, $2,800. Another page. March, wages for 112 staff, $9,500. Another. July, purchase of 2 Indian elephants for the children's menagerie, $6,000. The numbers are staggering, incomprehensible. They speak of a wealth so vast it could bend reality to its will, a fortune that could raise a French chateau on a desolate American coastline, command an army of servants, and even buy the most exotic creatures on earth simply for amusement. The reporter stands in the ruin of that dream. He can smell the decay, the damp rot of a fortune squandered, of a family broken. He can feel the cold that has nothing to do with the January air. It is the cold of absence, the cold of tragedy. How did it come to this? How does a dream built of marble and gold, a fortress of wealth designed to last for 1,000 years, crumble into dust and memory in less than 50? To understand the ruin, you must first understand the dream. To understand the man who fell, you must understand the mountain he built. This is the story of that mountain. Its name was Briarcliff, and this is the story of the man who built it, a man who got everything he ever wanted, and in doing so, lost everything that mattered. Before Alistair Finch, before the railroad spur and the steam shovels, before the shiploads of Italian marble, there was just the land. For centuries, it was known to the local Mi'kmaq as the place where the sea sings. A rugged, unyielding stretch of coast. Granite cliffs fell sharply into a churning, violent sea. Dense forests of pine and spruce grew right to the edge of the bluffs, their branches twisted into permanent sculpture by the unceasing wind. It was beautiful, but it was a harsh, unforgiving beauty. The soil was thin and rocky. The winters were brutal, with nor'easters that could bury a cottage in snow and ice for weeks. Early European settlers tried to tame it. They cleared small plots for farming, but the land fought back. They built fishing shacks in the coves, but the sea often reclaimed them. For generations, it was a place people passed by on their way to somewhere else, a place of shipwrecks and ghost stories. The most famous was the wreck of the Isolde in 1834, a British merchant ship that foundered on the rocks during a September gale. All hands were lost. For years after, locals claimed you could hear the voices of the drowned sailors calling from the fog. The land remained wild, sparsely populated by fishermen, farmers, and a few hardy eccentrics who preferred the company of the ocean to that of men. They knew the land's secrets, where the fresh water springs ran, where the wild blueberries grew thickest, which coves offered shelter from a sudden storm. In the 1880s, a small utopian religious community, the Children of the New Dawn, purchased 1,000 acres. They believed the raw, powerful nature of the place would bring them closer to God. They sought a life of purity, free from the corrupting influence of the industrializing world. They built a simple communal hall, a few Spartan dormitories, and planted vast vegetable gardens. They were ascetics, vegetarians who rose before dawn to pray and worked the land until dusk. They were peaceful, self-sufficient, and utterly out of place. The land, as it always did, tested them. The rocky soil blunted their plows. The short growing season withered their crops. The brutal winters sapped their faith. Within a decade, their numbers dwindled. Their leader, a charismatic prophet named Brother Silas, died of pneumonia during the Great Blizzard of 1888. The remaining faithful scattered, leaving behind their simple buildings and overgrown gardens as a monument to a failed dream. The land fell quiet again. It was owned by a timber company in Boston that saw no immediate profit in harvesting the gnarled, wind-beaten trees. It was a line item on a balance sheet, a forgotten asset. This was the place Alistair Finch chose, not a gentle, manicured landscape like the estates in Newport, not a fashionable, sun-drenched shore like Palm Beach. He chose the wild place, the difficult place, the place that had resisted all previous attempts at conquest. Because for Alistair Finch, life was not about ease. It was about overcoming. It was about proving that his will, backed by his fortune, was stronger than rock, stronger than the sea, stronger than history itself. He did not want to join a landscape. He wanted to dominate one. Alistair Finch was not born to this kind of power. He was born into its shadow. His father, Elias Finch, was a stern, hard-working industrialist who had built a respectable fortune in textile manufacturing. Elias was a man of substance, not style. He valued thrift, discipline, and discretion. He had 2 sons. The elder, Marcus, was his father's image, serious, responsible, and destined to inherit the core business. Marcus was tall and handsome, educated at Harvard, and moved easily within the circles of Boston's old money. He was everything his father wanted him to be. Alistair was the second son, the afterthought. He was smaller than his brother, quieter, and prone to bouts of illness as a child that kept him indoors. While Marcus was playing football and sailing, Alistair was reading. He devoured books on history, on architecture, on the great empires of the past. He was fascinated by men who built things that lasted. Caesar, Louis XIV, Napoleon. His father saw this quiet, bookish nature as a weakness. He tried to toughen the boy up, sending him to work in the mills during the summer. But Alistair hated the noise, the grime, the sheer ugliness of it. He saw the mills not as a source of pride, but as a prison of practicality. The family's wealth was comfortable, but it was not spectacular. It was mill money, looked down upon by the Boston Brahmins, whose fortunes were older and derived from shipping and banking. The Finches were tolerated, but they were not truly accepted. Alistair felt this slight more keenly than anyone. He saw the condescending smiles, heard the whispered remarks. It planted a seed of resentment in him, a burning need to prove that the name Finch was the equal of any Cabot or Lowell. His brother Marcus seemed untroubled by their social standing. He was content to run the family business, marry a suitable girl from a respectable family, and live a life of quiet dignity. For Alistair, this was a living death. The rivalry between the brothers was the central drama of their young lives. It was a quiet, simmering war. Marcus excelled without apparent effort, earning their father's praise. Alistair had to fight for every scrap of recognition. When their father died, the will was predictable. Marcus inherited the textile mills, the family home on Beacon Hill, the seat on the bank board. He inherited the legacy. Alistair was given a smaller, less glamorous part of the family holdings, a chemical company in New Jersey that produced industrial dyes. It was a consolation prize, a dirty, smelly business his father had acquired in a foreclosure. It was meant to keep him occupied and out of the way. For any other man, it might have been an insult. For Alistair, it was an opportunity. He moved to New Jersey, away from the stifling judgment of Boston society. He threw himself into the business with a ferocity that stunned everyone. He worked 18-hour days. He slept in a small room above the factory. He learned every aspect of the chemical processes. He was not just managing the company, he was reinventing it. He hired a team of young, brilliant chemists and set them a simple task: create brighter, cheaper, more permanent dyes than anyone else in the world. While Marcus was attending society dinners, Alistair was living in a world of beakers and formulas. In 1898, they made a breakthrough: a synthetic indigo dye that was vastly superior to the natural version. It was a revolution. The textile industry, including the mills run by his own brother, was a captive market. Within 5 years, Finch Chemical dominated the global dye market. Alistair's consolation prize had become a money machine of unbelievable power. The profits were astronomical. He was no longer just wealthy. He was rich on a scale that dwarfed his family's old money fortune. He was richer than Marcus, richer than all the Boston Brahmins combined. He married Eleanor Vance, a woman of impeccable beauty and pedigree from a Philadelphia family whose prestige far outstripped its bank account. She was his entry into the world that had once scorned him. Together, they were a formidable pair. He had the power, she had the grace. But the money was not enough. The beautiful wife was not enough. He needed a symbol, a monument to his victory. He needed to build something that would make the family home on Beacon Hill look like a gatekeeper's cottage, something that would force the world, and especially his brother Marcus, to acknowledge the magnitude of his achievement. He started looking for land. He didn't want a plot in an established resort. He wanted a kingdom. The search took 2 years. He sent agents up and down the eastern seaboard. They brought him portfolios of pastoral estates, of scenic farmland, of beachfront properties. He rejected them all. They were too small, too tame, too civilized. Then, an agent told him about the forgotten tract of land on the coast, the former utopian colony. 12,000 acres of raw, untamed wilderness. The agent presented it as a problem. It was remote, inaccessible, battered by storms. Alistair saw it differently. He saw a blank canvas. He traveled there himself in the autumn of 1905. He stood on the highest bluff, the one where Brother Silas had once preached to his dwindling flock. The wind tore at his coat. The sea crashed against the rocks below, sending plumes of white spray into the air. The forest behind him was a riot of fall color. He saw not an obstacle, but a stage for the grandest house in America. He turned to his assistant. "Buy it," he said. "Buy all of it." The vision for Briarcliff did not emerge slowly. It exploded from Alistair Finch's mind, fully formed, a fantasy of impossible scale. It wasn't merely a home. It was a statement of industrial might, a declaration of war against the understated tastes of old money. It would be a palace to rival the great houses of Europe, but it would be defiantly American, powered by modern technology, and built with the speed and efficiency of a Finch chemical factory. He did not want a house. He wanted a landmark. To turn this vision into reality, he needed an architect as audacious as himself. He found him in Julian Voigt. Voigt was a German-American genius, a master of the Beaux-Arts style, but he was also considered a difficult, temperamental artist. He had been fired from 2 major public commissions for refusing to compromise his designs. He was brilliant, and he was available. Finch summoned Voigt to his office in New York. He unrolled a topographical map of the coastline. He didn't show Voigt sketches or floor plans. He described a feeling. "I want the house to look as if it grew from the cliffs," Finch said, his voice quiet but intense. "It should command the sea. When ships pass, their captains should look at this house and know that a Titan lives here." Voigt was captivated. Here was a patron who didn't want to copy a French chateau. He wanted to build a myth. The 2 men formed an immediate combustible partnership. Finch was the visionary, the engine of will and money. Voigt was the artist, translating that will into stone and steel. They decided on a style that was a hybrid of a French Renaissance chateau and a rugged Scottish castle. It would have the elegant lines and soaring roofs of Chambord, but it would be built from the native granite of the bluff itself, giving it an ancient, powerful presence. The scale was preposterous. The main house would have over 250 rooms, a central great hall with a 70-foot-high ceiling, a dining room that could seat 100 guests, a two-story library designed to hold 20,000 volumes, a ballroom with a floor built on a cushion of springs for dancing. There would be 35 bedrooms for family and guests, each with its own marble bathroom, 65 fireplaces, each one a unique work of art carved by European craftsmen, and it would be a technological marvel. Briarcliff would be one of the first private homes in the world to be designed from the ground up with electricity. It would have its own power plant, capable of lighting a small city. It would have a central heating system, a network of internal telephones, 2 electric elevators, and a massive state-of-the-art kitchen with walk-in freezers. The first challenge was logistics. The site was miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a rutted dirt road. There was no way to transport the millions of tons of material required. Finch's solution was simple and brutal. He built his own railway. He laid a 15-mile spur line from the main coastal railroad directly to the construction site. It was a staggering feat of engineering, requiring 3 trestle bridges and blasting through several hills of solid granite. It cost a fortune. It was completed in 6 months. With the railway in place, the world's treasures began to pour into the wilderness. Entire quarries of marble were shipped from Carrara, Italy, limestone from Indiana, oak for the paneling from England, slate for the roof from Wales. An army of stonemasons, mostly from Italy and Scotland, were brought in. They built their own small village at the base of the bluff, complete with a church, a tavern, and a general store. At the peak of construction, more than 1,000 men worked on the hill. Finch established an on-site brick kiln, a woodworking mill, and a blacksmith's forge. It was less a construction site than a self-contained industrial city. Finch was a constant presence, a whirlwind of energy. He obsessed over every detail. He would argue with Voigt for hours over the precise angle of a roofline. He personally inspected shipments of marble, rejecting any piece with the slightest imperfection. He ordered the dining room ceiling, a massive fresco depicting scenes from Wagnerian operas, to be painted and then completely scraped off and redone because he felt the shade of blue was insufficiently celestial. The cost spiraled. The initial budget of $2 million doubled, then tripled. His financial advisors in New York sent panicked letters. His brother Marcus publicly called the project an act of vulgar madness. Alistair ignored them all. The more he spent, the more powerful he felt. The house was a machine that ate money, and he was the man who could feed it. He was pouring his entire being, his fortune, his ambition, and his rage into the stone and mortar of Briarcliff. The landscape itself was reshaped. Finch hired Frederick Law Olmsted, Jr., the son of the man who designed Central Park, to tame the wilderness around the house. Olmsted's team moved thousands of mature trees to create sweeping vistas. They blasted away rock to create a series of terraced Italian gardens that cascaded down the bluff towards the sea. They built a vast complex of greenhouses that could supply the house with fresh flowers and exotic fruits year-round. For 6 years, the bluff was a scene of controlled chaos. The air was filled with the sound of blasting, of steam engines, of hammers on stone, and of men shouting in a dozen different languages. It was the sound of a dream being wrenched into existence. Finally, in the winter of 1911, it was done. The last craftsman packed his tools. The last piece of furniture was put in place. The army of workers departed, leaving their temporary village to be reclaimed by the forest. Silence descended on the bluff once more, but it was a new kind of silence. The silence of a palace waiting for its king. Breer Cliff was officially opened on Christmas Eve, 1911. Alistair and Eleanor Finch hosted a party that would become the stuff of legend. 300 guests arrived on a private velvet-lined train chartered by Finch from New York City. They stepped off the train onto a heated platform at the Breer Cliff station, where a fleet of motor cars waited to ferry them up the winding, torch-lit drive to the house. What they saw took their breath away. The house blazed with light, every one of its hundreds of windows a golden rectangle against the deep blue of the winter sky. It didn't look like a house. It looked like a constellation that had fallen to earth. Inside was a world of unimaginable opulence. A 30-foot Christmas tree, decorated with thousands of hand-blown glass ornaments from Germany, stood in the great hall. An orchestra played from a minstrel's gallery high above. Servants in crisp livery moved silently through the crowds, offering champagne and caviar. The guests were a curated collection of America's new royalty, industrial tycoons, banking scions, Broadway stars, and even a few curious members of the European aristocracy. It was a gathering of power, fame, and, above all, money. Marcus Finch was there. He had been invited, of course. To refuse would have been a public declaration of war. He walked through the magnificent rooms, his face a mask of polite indifference. But Alistair saw the look in his brother's eyes. It was not admiration. It was not even envy. It was a kind of horrified awe, the look of a man witnessing a beautiful, spectacular, and utterly unsustainable act of madness. The golden age of Breer Cliff had begun. For the next decade, it was the center of its own universe. Life at the estate was run with the precision of a grand hotel and the ceremony of a royal court. The permanent staff numbered over 100. There were chefs from Paris, maids from Ireland, groundskeepers from Scotland, and a team of engineers to manage the estate's power plant and waterworks. Eleanor Finch was the perfect hostess. Graceful, elegant, and seemingly tireless, she orchestrated the complex social life of the estate. She planned menus, arranged flowers, and made every guest feel as though they were the most important person in the world. She was the warm, human heart of the cold stone palace. Alistair played the part of the magnanimous host, but he was more like a theatrical producer. He loved the spectacle. He would stage elaborate circus performances on the lawn for his children's birthdays. He built a private zoo populated with kangaroos, monkeys, and the two famous elephants named Castor and Pollux. He hosted weekend-long shooting parties in the estate's private forests and regattas in the cove below the house. Presidents and movie stars came to visit. Thomas Edison consulted on the electrical systems. Ignacy Paderewski, the great Polish pianist and statesman, gave a private concert in the music room. Harry Houdini, a guest at one Halloween party, amazed the crowd by escaping from a locked safe that had been submerged in the indoor swimming pool. The cost of this lifestyle was astronomical. The estate's operating budget was over $1 million a year, an amount equivalent to more than $30 million today. The coal bill alone was a fortune. The greenhouses required a dedicated staff of 12. Just keeping the windows clean was a full-time job for a team of 6 men. Alistair didn't care. The money flowed from Finch Chemical in an endless, colorful river. Breer Cliff was not an investment. It was a performance, and it was a triumphant one. The same society that had once snubbed him now clamored for invitations. Newspapers ran breathless stories about the splendors of the Finch Palace by the sea. He had won. He had built his monument, and the world had come to worship at its gates. He had a beautiful wife, 2 healthy children, and a fortune that seemed limitless. He had everything a man could dream of. But a dream built on such a scale is a fragile thing. Its foundations are not stone, but money and will. And when one of them cracks, the whole magnificent structure can begin to tremble. The first crack appeared in the winter of 1918. The Spanish flu, which had been ravaging the globe, found its way to the isolated paradise of Briar Cliff. It swept through the staff quarters with terrifying speed. Eleanor, ignoring Alistair's pleas to isolate herself, insisted on nursing the sick maids and footmen herself. It was her duty, she said. They were her household, her responsibility. She caught the flu. Her case was severe. The best doctors were summoned from Boston and New York, but they could do nothing. She died in her bedroom, a lavish suite overlooking the sea, with Alistair holding her hand. She was 38 years old. Her death shattered the dream of Briar Cliff. It was as if the sun had gone out. The laughter and music that had filled the great halls were replaced by a profound, echoing silence. Alistair was destroyed. Eleanor had been more than his wife. She had been his social ambassador, the humanizing element of his grand, cold ambition. Without her, the house was no longer a home. It was just a collection of cavernous, empty rooms, a mausoleum. He retreated into himself. The lavish parties stopped. Guests were no longer invited. He dismissed half the staff, not for financial reasons, but because their presence was a constant reminder of the life he had lost. He would wander the halls at night, a solitary figure in a vast, dark palace. Paragraph. The children, a boy and a girl, were sent away to boarding school. He could not bear to look at them. They had their mother's eyes. His work at Finch Chemical, once his obsession, now seemed meaningless. He let his managers run the company. His only remaining passion was the house itself. But it was a dark, possessive passion. He began to make strange additions. He commissioned a massive, elaborate pipe organ for the Great Hall, though no one was ever there to play it. He became obsessed with spiritualism, hosting seances in the library, desperate to contact Eleanor's spirit. His rival brother Marcus saw an opportunity. With Alistair adrift in grief, Marcus began a campaign to seize control of Finch Chemical. He quietly bought up stock. He spread rumors on Wall Street that Alistair was mentally unstable, that his erratic behavior was jeopardizing the company. The turning point came in 1922. Marcus engineered a proxy battle for control of the board of directors. Alistair, wrapped in his grief and his obsessions, barely put up a fight. He lost. His own brother, the man whose approval he had sought his entire life, had betrayed him and stolen his empire. He was left with a vast personal fortune from his years of dividends, but the engine that produced the money was gone. For the first time, he had to consider the cost of Briar Cliff. The house was no longer a symbol of his power, but a drain on his dwindling resources. The annual operating costs were a hemorrhage. And now, a new threat emerged: the federal income tax. Once a minor annoyance for the wealthy, the top tax rates had soared to pay for the First World War. Alistair's income was being decimated. The house, his glorious creation, was beginning to eat him alive. He closed off entire wings of the mansion. The Italian gardens became overgrown. The greenhouses fell into disrepair. The remaining staff, their wages often paid late, whispered that the master was going mad. In 1924, in an act that shocked what remained of his social circle, he married again. His bride was Lillian Croft, his late wife's personal secretary. She was a plain, quiet woman, fiercely loyal to Alistair, who had stayed on after Eleanor's death to manage his chaotic affairs. It was a minor scandal. To marry a servant, a former employee, was a final defiant gesture against the society he now despised. Lillian was a kind and capable woman, but she was not Eleanor. She was overwhelmed by the scale of Briar Cliff and by the ghost of her predecessor. She tried to bring life back to the house, but Alistair's darkness was too pervasive. The golden age was over. The long, slow decline had begun. The Great Depression was the final, fatal blow. Alistair's investments, heavily concentrated in the stock market, were wiped out. His fortune, once one of the greatest in America, was gone. He was left with the house, the unsellable, unmaintainable, monstrous house. The bills mounted. He sold off the art, the tapestries, the silver, the rare books in the library. Piece by piece, the soul of Briarcliff was stripped away and auctioned off to pay the coal bill and the property taxes. He fired the last of the staff, save for a cook and a handyman. He and Lillian lived in a small suite of rooms off the kitchen, closing the great cold heart of the mansion. The grand halls, once filled with music and light, were now shrouded in dust cloths and darkness. The wind rattled the windows of the empty ballroom. The Wagnerian gods on the dining room ceiling looked down on a table that would never be set again. Alistair Finch, the man who had commanded an army of builders and bent a landscape to his will, was now a prisoner in his own creation. He spent his days in the library, poring over the old household ledgers, the numbers a testament to a life that now seemed like a fantasy. He would trace the entries with a trembling finger. Champagne for the New Year's gala, $5,000. Rose bushes for the West Terrace, $2,000. He became obsessed with designing his own tomb. He hired Julian Voigt, the architect of Briarcliff, now an old man himself, to design a grand mausoleum to be built on the highest point of the estate. It was to be a miniature version of the house, a palace of death, to mirror his palace of life. He wanted it built of the finest black granite, with bronze doors depicting his own life story. But there was no money. The plans were drawn, but the foundation was never dug. The rivalry with his brother continued to the bitter end. Marcus, whose conservative management had guided the old family textile business safely through the Depression, offered to help. He would buy Briarcliff, he said, for a fraction of its cost, and give Alistair a comfortable allowance to live elsewhere. Alistair's pride would not allow it. He sent Marcus a one-sentence telegram, "I would rather see it burn." He died in 1938 of a heart attack. He was found by Lillian, slumped over his desk in the library, the old ledgers open before him. He was 69 years old. His obituary in the New York Times was brief. It mentioned his early success with Finch Chemical and the creation of his famous estate. It was an understated end to a life lived at maximum volume. Lillian, left with a mountain of debt, had no choice. She sold Briarcliff to the United States government for a pittance just before the outbreak of the Second World War. The price was $125,000, less than the cost of the railway spur Finch had built to supply it. The government, in its infinite practicality, saw not a palace but a large, well-built structure in a secure, remote location. The house began its second life. During the war, it was requisitioned by the Department of Defense. The grand ballroom, with its spring-loaded dance floor, was converted into a top-secret research facility for developing radar technology. Scientists and engineers slept in the guest bedrooms where millionaires had once stayed. The ornate furniture was put into storage or simply broken up for firewood. After the war, the house was transferred to the Veterans Administration. It became the Briarcliff Psychiatric Hospital, a place for soldiers suffering from what was then called shell shock. The transformation was brutal. The silk wallpaper was stripped, and the walls were painted a sterile, institutional green. Security screens were bolted over the windows. The library, once Alistair's sanctuary, became a ward for the most disturbed patients. The elegant Italian gardens were paved over for parking. The house that was built as a temple to beauty became a warehouse for human sorrow. Locals whispered that the place was haunted, not by the ghosts of drowned sailors, but by the spirit of Alistair Finch himself, doomed to wander the halls, watching the desecration of his dream. They said you could sometimes see a light flicker in the windows of the master suite on stormy nights. By the mid-1950s, the hospital was deemed obsolete. The government built a new, modern facility inland. Briarcliff was decommissioned and abandoned. The doors were locked, the windows were boarded up, and the estate was left to the wind and the sea. This was the era of its great decay, the period when the Vandals came. They smashed the remaining windows, spray-painted graffiti on the marble walls, and lit fires on the ballroom floor. The house was picked clean by scavengers. Anything of value that the government had left behind, copper piping, brass fixtures, slate from the roof, was stolen. Nature began its slow, patient work of reclamation. Ivy crept up the granite walls, covering the intricate carvings. Saplings took root on the terraces. The roof began to leak, and water, the great enemy of all houses, began its destructive work. Plaster ceilings collapsed, floors buckled. The magnificent pipe organ, its pipes already looted, was ruined by damp and rust. Briarcliff became a local legend, a haunted house, a place for teenagers to test their courage on a moonless night. It was during this period that the reporter came to document its final days before the scheduled demolition. The photographs he took captured the tragic grandeur of the ruin. They were published in a national magazine, a portfolio of decay titled "The Death of a Palace." The article sparked a flicker of interest. A small group of local preservationists formed the Friends of Briarcliff. They petitioned the state. They wrote letters. They argued that to destroy the house would be an act of cultural vandalism. But they had no money, and the demolition date loomed. Salvation came from an unlikely source. A Hollywood film director, famous for his gothic horror movies, was scouting locations for his next picture, The Spectre of the Sea Cliff. He saw the pictures of Briarcliff in the magazine and knew he had found his set. The film studio leased the property from the state for a year. They paid for emergency repairs to stabilize the structure. The movie was a huge hit, and suddenly Briarcliff was famous again. It was no longer just a local ruin, it was a movie star. The film's iconic images of the fog-shrouded, derelict mansion captured the public imagination. The Friends of Briarcliff seized the opportunity. They used the house's newfound fame to launch a massive fundraising campaign. Money began to trickle in, then pour in. A wealthy philanthropist, who had been a guest at the house as a child during its golden age, made a transformative donation. The state, seeing the potential for a major tourist attraction, finally agreed to sell the property to the newly formed Briarcliff Preservation Trust. The demolition order was rescinded. The house was saved. The restoration was a project almost as ambitious as the original construction. It took 2 decades and tens of millions of dollars. An international team of craftsmen and historians was assembled. They used Finch's original blueprints and the reporter's old photographs to recreate the lost interiors. They scraped away the institutional green paint to reveal the remnants of silk wallpaper beneath. They remilled the oak paneling. They commissioned artisans in Europe to reweave the tapestries and recarve the broken marble fireplaces. Piece by piece, the ghost of Briarcliff was given flesh again. Today, Briarcliff endures. It stands on its bluff, magnificent once more, the granite walls scrubbed clean of graffiti, the windows gleaming, the slate roof fully restored. It is a museum, a historic landmark, and one of the most popular tourist destinations in the state. Hundreds of thousands of people walk its halls every year. They gaze up at the 70-foot ceiling of the Great Hall. They marvel at the Wagnerian fresco in the dining room. They walk through the restored Italian gardens and look out at the same wild, beautiful sea that Alistair Finch sought to command. They hear the story of his ambition, his fabulous wealth, and his tragic decline. The tour guides tell them about the lavish parties, the elephants, and the scandalous second marriage. The house has become a cautionary tale, a perfectly preserved monument to the vanity of human wishes. But what is the true legacy of Alistair Finch? Was he a visionary or a madman, a builder or a destroyer? His dream of a private kingdom, a dynasty to last 1,000 years, failed utterly. His family line withered. His fortune evaporated. His name is now just a footnote in the story of the house he built. And yet, the house survives. It has outlived its creator and all his sorrows. It has been a home, a laboratory, a hospital, a ruin, and a museum. It has absorbed a century of human history into its stone walls. It has become something more than just one man's dream. It belongs to everyone now. If you stand on the great terrace at sunset and look out at the ocean, you can almost feel the presence of the past. You can almost hear the faint echo of an orchestra playing in the ballroom, the clink of champagne glasses, the sound of laughter drifting on the salt air. You can almost see the ghost of a man standing alone, watching the ships pass on the horizon. A man who built a palace to prove his worth to the world, only to find himself a king in an empty castle. The house is magnificent, and it is also a machine that eats resources. It still costs a fortune to maintain, a constant battle against time and the elements. Who pays for Brearcliff now? We all do. Through our ticket sales, our donations, our fascination with the stories of the spectacularly rich and the tragically flawed. In the end, Alistair Finch got his immortality, just not in the way he intended. He is not remembered for his company, or his wealth, or his family. He is remembered for the house, the beautiful, monstrous, indomitable house that was his greatest triumph and his ultimate ruin. Every mansion has its shadows. Every dream has its price.